My friend and Fox News colleague Gianno Caldwell was asked to leave a cafe in Miami for what? For being a conservative. That's what. These liberals have some kind of nerve and some kind of deranged a-hole audacity. It's time for final thoughts. If you're a Fox News viewer, you know my friend and colleague Gianno Caldwell. Not only is he a damn good political commentator, he's also a great person, an upstanding gentleman, and I'm proud to call him my friend. Over the weekend, he was asked to leave a cafe in Miami because his politics weren't aligned with the establishment. Take a listen to this.
One of the owners came over to the table and told us she had been listening to our conversation. We were not welcome there. And I said to her, I said, did I say something that was triggering to you? She said, no. She said, our politics aren't aligned. I'm one of the owners. I'm an owner here. I don't feel comfortable. You have to leave. So then I stood up, I walked out, and so did the rest of my group. Now, here's what we were talking about that was so problematic for this lady who happens to be white, I believe. I was talking to them as they were getting to know me for the first time about Fox News. They said, how do you like, working over at Fox News? I was talking to them about my values. They said, are you a conservative? I said, yes. In fact, I have a book called Taken for Granted, How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. You should get the book. I talked to them about my brother. I was on Capitol Hill just the other week talking to members of Congress about violent crime in America and trying to get justice for my brother and other victims of violent crime. I also talked about progressive DAs and how they're exacerbating the crime issue across the country. This was so problematic to this lady that she told me that I needed to get out of her establishment. If this was not the Jim Crow South, I couldn't tell much of a difference.
You've got to be freaking kidding me. First of all, lady, do you eavesdrop into conversations of all your guests, or was Gianno a special case? Second, how freaking dare she? If Gianno was a liberal, Al Sharpton would have been down there by now leading a protest and a lawsuit. These liberals are really something else, and not in a good way. They feel so powerful, entitled, and untouchable, they feel they not only have the right but the duty to pull crap like this. This lady was so triggered by a differing viewpoint, she eavesdropped to hear that she had to ask Gianno to leave the establishment? Welcome to 2023, where so-called woke progressives have brought back their own special form of ideological Jim Crow. Disgusting. And I know this kind of thing well because it happened to me a few years back in Minneapolis. Except in my case, the patrons chanted "F you bitch" at me and my parents and threw water on me before I was asked to leave. It's happened to me many, many times, including right here in Nashville, where some Looney Tune green hair tried to egg me from the 15th floor of her apartment building. She missed, of course, because liberals don't have great aim. But it's all this kind of crap so-called leaders like Maxine Waters asked for after all.
Let's stay the course. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
She's gotten her wish 100 times over. I never want to hear liberals preach about tolerance and diversity again. Y'all are fake and phony ass. You don't deserve to even pretend to care about people. Gianno's one of the nicest, most genuine people I know, and that BS commie cafe doesn't deserve his business. Oh, and lady, you're in a red state run by a man who's not only a staunch Republican, but also likely our next president, so get familiar. It's been a strange couple of years, folks. We went from being forcibly masked in airplanes less than a year ago to this. Flash forward. The FAA, that's the Federal Aviation Administration, has now loosened the EKG range for pilots while offering no explanation as to why. Yet they want to make sure you know it's not because of those sudden heart health issues and sudden deaths associated with that beloved COVID vaccine. Yeah, sure. Here to weigh in with what we all need to know is board-certified cardiologist and medical advisor to U.S. Freedom Flyers, Dr. Thomas Levy. All right, doctor, thank you so much for being with me. I have a lot of questions.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate the opportunity to use your stage in order to get this word out, because it is very important information, no doubt about it.
So I'm very confused by this loosening of the guidelines. So is the FAA essentially saying that if a few pilots have a heart episode or they drop dead in the cockpit under these new guidelines, that's a risk we should all be willing to take? Because that's how it reads to me.
Well, I got to say, early on, by that I mean about a month ago, I was very hard on the FAA as being completely negligent in this regard until I realized that nearly all the doctors and most of my fellow cardiologists weren't particularly alarmed about this prolongation of the period of time it takes for a heartbeat to conduct through the heart. However, in fact, when I investigated it, there's solid evidence that when this prolongs, there's a significant increase in the risk of heart arrhythmia, heart block requiring a pacemaker, and even an increased risk of death. And what made it even worse for the FAA, although I'm not sure they realize it, I hope they do soon, is that this PR interval, this conduction interval, was suddenly taking place in a large number of electrocardiograms since the beginning of the pandemic, since the presence of the persistent spike protein coming from either long-haul COVID or from the very proliferate vaccines, since they're designed to give mRNA that makes spike protein. So this is the problem. Now, the data that they accumulated on how bad this was on the PR interval before the pandemic. You can only imagine that this interval being prolonged now in the setting of the pandemic and the factors that I mentioned bodes very poorly for this not being just further inflammation of certain areas of the heart affecting the conduction system. It's highly alarming, no doubt about it.
That's what really concerns me. I know that you're an advisor to the Freedom Flyers. I had one of those pilots on my show a couple months back. Facebook was very angry that I posted that clip, so was Instagram, and at that point, so was Twitter. They didn't want a pilot talking about any fear of vaccine side effects, especially when it came to a pilot being in the cockpit and fearing having some kind of a heart issue or a heart episode. This is something that pilots are very, very concerned about. But for some reason, big tech and especially big pharma, they don't want that out there. But from what you've seen with working with the Freedom Flyers, with talking to other pilots and just individuals that have had heart issues, possibly because of the vaccine, are you concerned for our pilots in the air about what's going to be happening to them and to passengers for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
I'm very concerned. And let me emphasize one point, because you said maybe the vaccine. I want to say this is due to persistent spike protein, which comes from having COVID chronically, or from and due to the presence of the vaccine, because that's what the vaccine is designed to do, is to put the spike protein inside your body, and not everybody is able to eventually flush it out of their system. So no, we need to be very concerned about this. The other problem is with these areas of inflammation slowing down the conduction inside the heart, it can also make heart cells unstable. They're basically electrical cells designed to conduct the heartbeat through your heart. And because of that, when they get inflamed, they become unstable and they're prone to extra beats, and the extra beats can cause an arrhythmia, and that arrhythmia can be inconsequential, or it can be severe enough to cause cardiovascular collapse and even sudden death. So these are not inconsequential issues. They need to be taken seriously. I just want the FAA to realize what's going on. They could be forgiven for doing this as long as they rectify it by saying, oh, wow, this is really a serious issue. We're glad it came to our attention. Let's do more extensive testing. Because I'm not saying a pilot that has this prolongation should be banned from flying. He or she should make sure that certain critical tests, namely the cardiac troponin level and the D-dimer level, one measures heart inflammation, the other tracks abnormal blood clots, that those are normal. And once they're normal, in the event they were ever abnormal, then the pilot needs to pass certain basic cardiac testing that's never really been done before. I mean, the FAA should have required for a long time just a cardiac stress test, because they all only require an EKG. And if it's normal, That ends it. But the problem is an EKG does not predict heart attack, and that's what most commonly kills, let's say, a 50-year-old male in the prime time of his life. So these are all things. They need to address this spike protein. They need to address this issue of the PR interval, and they need to improve their testing in general.
Yeah, well, the FDA is one. I know that you said that they should just apologize and rectify the situation. Well, they're the least of my concern because there's a whole lot of people that really need a day of reckoning. I want to talk about these sudden deaths. We've got Damar Hamlin. We've got several individuals. It seems like every day we see somebody who just had a sudden heart attack. Now, there are some people that probably would have had a heart attack anyway. But, you know, as somebody who's looking at this and thinking, a lot of young, healthy people suddenly having heart episodes, we didn't see these kind of headlines 3-4 years ago before that experimental vaccine. How much of this do you attribute to vaccine side effects?
Almost all of it. I say that because it's my opinion that Damar Hamlin had an arrhythmia secondary to a smoldering low-grade inflammation in his heart, just like I described. But for people who aren't aware, there have been between 500 and 1,000 soccer players at the peak health of their life in Europe either collapse or drop dead while playing soccer in those leagues too. It just, for some reason, hasn't received the attention, but it's very dramatic. You can see the news reports that are generated with each one that collapses. You can see the video. So this is something, I mean, I never understand the reasons completely for why something is pushed under the rug, especially when it can affect your own sweet, warm body, because most people eventually fly, some very frequently.
Yeah, well, I'll say this, you don't have to. Liberalism is a disease in and of itself, and if the government tells liberals that they should get this vaccine, whether or not they're concerned about the vaccine side effects or not, they'll do it because they follow the liberal gospel, and that's how it goes. But I'm very concerned about this, and I'm even more concerned about young people. It's one thing when you're 50, 60 years old, we have to worry about those pilots, we have to worry about all Americans in that bracket. But what about these young people who were vaccinated once, twice, boosted? I'm talking very young people whose parents thought that that was the noble, valiant thing to do, is rush and get an experimental COVID vaccine. What are we going to see as those kids grow up? Have you seen any indications of the side effects that they're going to face, maybe for the rest of their lives?
Well, we're already seeing it, Tommy. We're already seeing it. And unfortunately, the spike protein that we're talking about seems to hit the young people, at least in regard to their heart, more often than the older folks. And I have to completely say and assert right now, and we all know pretty much, if we had our eyes open, what happened during most of this pandemic, where many doctors were prohibited from prescribing effective drugs for COVID. Well, not only are there drugs that are effective COVID, there are a host, many different natural substances, very well solidly established, that resolve early COVID and even late COVID and prevent COVID. My point being, Tommy, is there is no health reason for subjecting anybody to a vaccine that has potentially such horrible side effects, no matter how minimal they are. And I don't think they're minimal, but no matter how minimal they are, this should not be the approach. We're just completely abandoned therapeutics. All we do is emphasize pharmaceutical agents. And believe me, things like vitamin C and other agents, vitamin D, but especially vitamin C. Most people that have this problem are very low on vitamin C. And when you give large doses of it, you can completely obliterate the virus in a day.
That's astonishing to me that we are finally hearing about this, because medical professionals like yourself were silenced, they were censored, they were shamed and demonized for saying any of this even a year ago, even as much as 6 months ago. Now it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, but for a lot of people, that's too late because they already went and got the vaccine 1, 2, 3, 4 times. These individuals out there, I don't care how liberal they are, what would you tell somebody that's saying, you know what, every 6 months I'm ready to go get another booster? What would you tell that individual if you could get their ear and make them listen?
Well, I would say, if you're lucky enough to have gotten through your first 2 shots without any noticeable or severe problems, count yourself fortunate, because the toxicity and concentration of all the vaccines, for whatever reason, does not appear to be equal. So let's say you got one of the less toxic ones, it didn't harm you. However, and I can't make this more definitive, do not, under any circumstances, consider getting a booster, because that can be the gasoline that you throw on the smoldering fire of a very low-grade myocarditis that you still could have even though you're feeling well.
This is all so shocking to me. I want to thank you for being one of those individuals who's been brave and bold enough from the beginning to raise the warning signs and the red flags to all of this, because there are so many like you that wanted to say something, but they didn't have that intestinal fortitude to do it, and you have no doubt saved countless lives because of it. Thank you so much, doctor, for educating me and for speaking the truth. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate being on your show, Tomi. Get the good word out. Keep the good work up.
Oh, we will, and I hope to see you very soon, because I have a feeling there's going to be no shortage of discussion about this for the coming months and even years.
No, there shouldn't be. You're right.
Thank you so much.